Welcome to The Last Private Place, a citizen's and legislators' guide to neurorights. I'm Aria.
And I'm Guy. Over the next half hour or so, we're going to walk through what neurorights actually are, where the law stands in 2026, and the choices that fall to lawmakers in the next few years.
This essay was published as part of the TI One Voice initiative, an effort to give a unified voice to people who report being subjected to organized harassment, surveillance, and remote forms of abuse. So we'll be discussing both the broad policy questions and the concrete realities for people who say they've been affected.
Exactly. Let's dive in.
So Guy, let's start with the premise. Why is this conversation happening now?
Every right we have ever written down assumed one thing, that no matter what was done to a person's body, their possessions, or their words, the inside of their head remained theirs. The mind was the one place a king could not enter, a court could not subpoena, and a thief could not reach. That assumption is now obsolete.
Obsolete in what sense?
Devices already on sale can read the electrical signature of attention, mood, and intention. Laboratories can reconstruct words a person only imagined speaking, and images they only saw in their mind's eye. The question is no longer whether the mind can be touched from the outside, it is who will be allowed to touch it, under what conditions, and what happens to those who are touched without consent.
We have 19 sections mapped out, plus an introduction and a conclusion. How should listeners think about the structure?
Think of it as 4 arcs. First, what the field is and where the law stands, sections 1 through 3. Second, the deep concepts, sovereignty of thought, ownership, the right level to legislate, and the gaps, sections 4 through 7. Third, the hard parts, weapons, evidence, the upside, AI, the trade-offs, society and victims, sections 8 through 14. And fourth, action, sections 15 through 19, plus the conclusion.
Section 1. Let's begin with definitions. What exactly is neurotechnology?
It's any tool that measures, interprets, modulates or stimulates the nervous system. That spans a vast range: the cochlear implant that has restored hearing to 1 million people, the deep brain stimulator that quiets the tremor of Parkinson's disease, the EEG headband sold to improve sleep or focus, the experimental cortical implant that lets a paralyzed person move a cursor by intention alone.
So clinical at one end and consumer at the other.
Right. What unites them is that they convert the activity of neurons into data, and increasingly run that data back into the brain.
And what turned this from a clinical curiosity into a governance emergency?
2 forces. The first is miniaturization and commercialization. Brain sensing has escaped the hospital and entered the consumer market in earbuds, headsets, and wellness wearables. The second is artificial intelligence.
Why does AI matter so much here?
Raw neural signals are noisy and, on their own, reveal little. Modern machine learning is extraordinarily good at finding the pattern in the noise, turning a smear of electrical activity into a reliable inference about what a person is feeling, attending to, or about to decide. Neurotechnology supplies the signal, AI supplies the meaning. Apart, each is limited. Together, they make the interior of a human being legible in a way no prior technology has approached.
Section 2, Definitions. What do we mean by neurorights?
The term was popularized by the neuroscientist Raphael Yusti of Columbia University and the interdisciplinary Morningside Group. In a 2017 commentary in Nature, they argued that existing human rights instruments were written in language too general to constrain brain technology, and proposed 5 specific protections.
What are they?
Mental privacy, keep neural data from disclosure. Personal identity and intact, continuous sense of self. Free will and agency, decisions that are genuinely your own. Fair augmentation, enhancement without a new caste system. And protection from bias, no algorithmic discrimination on neural data. That framework now anchors most national legislation.
And there's a debate inside the field itself about whether these are really new rights.
Yes. One camp argues these are genuinely new rights that must be written into law. A second camp, including some of the movement's own allies, argues that nothing new is needed, that mental privacy and integrity are already implied by existing rights to privacy, bodily integrity, freedom of thought, and non-discrimination, and the task is merely to interpret those rights for a new technology.
Is that a sterile academic quarrel?
No, and that's the point. It determines whether a country needs a constitutional amendment, a new statute, or simply a regulator willing to apply the laws it already has. Legislators will hear both sides, and they have to choose.
Section 3, the landscape. Where does the law actually stand in 2026?
Read it as a stack. At the top, a global recommendation. Below that, a handful of pioneering national constitutions. Below that, a thickening layer of subnational statutes, the U.S. states. And underneath, a great deal of pending legislation. 8 years took the field from a journal commentary to the first global standard.
Let's take that global keystone first. The UNESCO recommendation.
Adopted on the 12th of November, 2025 after 6 years of negotiation among UNESCO's member states. It's the first attempt to set a rights-based standard covering the entire life cycle of neurotechnology, from how a product is designed, through deployment, to disposal.
What does it ask states to do?
Protect neural data, demand genuine and informed consent, guarantee transparency, and shield children and other vulnerable groups. On enhancement, it asks states to forbid any direct or indirect pressure to undergo neural augmentation, to prohibit enhancement that undermines dignity or equal opportunity, and to draw clear lines between what is acceptable, off-limits, or permitted only under strict oversight.
And the catch?
It's not legally binding. It's soft law, a standard states are urged to adopt, not a treaty they must follow. The drafters note that UNESCO's 2021 AI ethics recommendation helped shape the binding EU AI Act, so soft law can harden over time. But for now, its force depends entirely on whether national legislatures act on it.
And one country has already gone all the way to its constitution.
Chile. On October 14, 2021, its Congress passed Law 21.383, amending Article 19 of the Constitution to require that scientific and technological development serve people and respect their physical and psychic integrity, the first time any nation gave brain activity explicit constitutional protection.
And it was tested in court almost immediately.
On August 9, 2023, Chile's Supreme Court found that the U.S. consumer neurotech company Emotive had violated the constitutional rights of Senator Guido Girardi, who had used their Insight EEG headset. The court ordered the firm to delete all of his brain data and rejected the argument that anonymizing the data turned it into mere statistics exempt from consent. The world's first court decision squarely on neuroprivacy.
But there's a caveat.
Yes, legal scholars have since noted that the ruling may have rested as much on ordinary data protection law as on the new Neurorights clause, and that inferred mental data, the conclusions an algorithm draws from your brain signals, still sits in a gray zone even under Chile's strong text. That gap matters, because the inference is usually the part that can hurt you.
What's happening in the rest of Latin America, and in Europe?
Chile is not alone. Spain's 2021 Charter of Digital Rights includes Neurorights provisions. Brazil moved to constitutionalize mental integrity. And Mexico, Colombia, Uruguay, and Argentina have all seen legislative activity.
And Europe?
Europe has no dedicated Neurorights instrument. It relies on a patchwork, the GDPR, which treats health and biometric data as special categories, the EU AI Act, which bans certain emotion recognition uses in workplaces and schools and some manipulative subliminal techniques, and the 2019 OECD recommendation, the first international standard of any kind in this space. The honest summary for a European legislator is that no current European law was written with brain-reading consumer devices in mind, and the fit is awkward.
And the United States?
With no comprehensive federal privacy law, the U.S. has produced a patchwork at the state level. Colorado in 2024 became the first state to classify neural data as sensitive under its Privacy Act. California amended its own law the same year. Montana and Connecticut followed in 2025. At least 15 further bills are pending.
And the federal side?
The proposed MIND Act of 2025 would direct the Federal Trade Commission to study neural data practices. The American Medical Association called for tighter regulation in mid-2025. And senators have pressed the FTC to investigate whether companies are exploiting consumers' brain data.
There's a definition problem too, a warning for drafters.
Right. The states can't even agree on what neural data means. California excludes data derived from neural signals by an algorithm. Colorado includes it. Montana excludes downstream physical effects. These are not pedantic differences. A law that protects only the raw signal and not the inference protects the lock but not the valuables. Any legislator drafting in this area should treat the definition as the single most consequential clause in the bill.
Here's the whole landscape on one slide.
UNESCO Global, Soft Law. Chile Binding, Constitutional. Spain Guiding. Brazil Binding Constitutional. EU Indirect, through GDPR and the AI Act. US States Binding, treating neural data as sensitive. US Federal Pending. That's where we are.
Section 4, Sovereignty of Thought. There's an older right underneath all this.
Freedom of thought, protected in Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's always been treated as absolute, one of the very few rights admitting no exception, no derogation even in war.
Why could it be absolute?
Because it was unenforceable from the outside. No state could actually reach into a head to police a thought, so the right cost nothing to grant in full. Neurotechnology removes that comfortable impossibility. For the first time, the forum internum, the inner forum of the mind, is becoming technically accessible.
So what does a real guarantee of sovereignty of thought require?
4 things at once. First, a default of inaccessibility. Neural data should be opt-in only, never the price of using a device. Second, purpose limitation with teeth. Data gathered to help you sleep cannot be repurposed to score you for a loan.
And the other 2?
Third, prohibitions that survive consent. Just as a person cannot validly consent to be enslaved, there should be neural interventions like covert influence or manipulation that bypasses conscious deliberation, that no terms of service checkbox can authorize. Fourth, enforceability. Rights without remedies are decoration. The Chilean case mattered precisely because a court ordered data deleted.
Section 5, Ownership. Can a company own your thoughts?
Under most current law, the uncomfortable answer is closer to yes than anyone is comfortable admitting. When you accept the terms of service of a consumer EEG device, you typically grant the manufacturer a broad license to store, process and often share the data your brain generates.
Has anyone documented this?
A 2024 report by the Neurorights Foundation examined 30 consumer neurotechnology companies. 29 of the 30 had access to users' brain data and imposed essentially no meaningful limits on that access, and nearly all reserved the right to share it with third parties. Your thoughts, rendered as data, are being treated like any other exhaustive digital life.
3 models in contention for how to govern this. Walk us through them.
First, property models grant you a property right in your neural data which you can license or sell. Intuitive, but dangerous. Anything you can sell, you can be pressured or impoverished into selling, and a market in thoughts will find the desperate first.
Second model?
Data protection models, the EU and US state approach. Treat neural data as an especially sensitive category, with heightened consent and security duties. Path of least resistance, but it inherits all the weaknesses of consent-based privacy. People click agree without reading, and the protection collapses.
Third,
bodily integrity or inalienable models, favored by the Morningside Group. Treat neural data like a transplanted organ, something that may be donated for altruistic or medical purposes but never commercialized, regardless of consent. The strongest protection, and the hardest to enact, because it forecloses a business model investors are counting on. The decisive question is which model we choose, and whether we choose it before or after the markets are built around the weakest one.
Section 6. At what level should this be legislated?
Neural data crosses borders at the speed of a cloud upload. A Chilean's brain data was processed on servers in San Francisco. Protection at any single level is necessary but never sufficient. The realistic answer is that neurorights must be legislated at every level at once.
Each layer doing what it's best at.
Right. Global sets norms and can ban the worst uses. Regional handles cross-border enforcement. National supplies the foundational right. Only a constitution can make a right resistant to ordinary political bargaining. Subnational handles consumer protection. And sectoral rules bind the doctors, employers and soldiers who actually deploy the technology. Chile shows the foundational right can be done. The task of the next decade is to grow the UNESCO recommendation from a recommendation into a convention.
Section 7. The gaps. Where does the existing law fall short?
6 big holes. First, inferred mental states. Most laws protect the neural signal and ignore the algorithmic inference, the very thing that reveals your mood, attention, or political reaction. Closing this gap is the single highest value fix available. Second, non-consumer use. Existing statutes mostly target companies selling to consumers, and are largely silent on the state, the employer, the school, and the insurer.
Third and fourth?
Third, manipulation and output, not just input. Nearly all law concerns reading the brain, almost none addresses writing to it. Fourth, redress. There's no established cause of action for my mind was read or altered without consent.
And the last two?
Fifth, detection and audit standards. No jurisdiction yet requires neurotech systems to keep tamper-evident logs of what they read and wrote. Sixth, weaponization. No binding international instrument prohibits the development or use of neuroweapons. That's the largest hole of all, and the subject of the next section.
Section 8. Neuroweapons and cognitive warfare. This is the hardest territory.
It's the part of the subject most prone to both reckless hype and reckless dismissal, so it deserves the most careful handling. Two things are simultaneously true. First, military and intelligence establishments treat the brain as an emerging operational domain. Second, the most dramatic public claims about deployed mind control weapons remain unproven and, in important cases, have been formally judged unlikely. A serious policy must hold both facts at once.
Start with the doctrine.
NATO has formally explored cognitive warfare as an emerging domain. Its associated studies have used arresting language describing the human brain as a contested battlefield of the 21st century. At the soft end, cognitive warfare means disinformation and algorithmic manipulation of attention and emotion through social media, influencing minds at scale without touching a single neuron. At the hard end sit hypothesized directed energy or acoustic devices intended to physically disrupt the nervous system. The soft end is unquestionably happening now. The hard end is where the evidence becomes genuinely disputed.
Havana syndrome. Tell us the story straight.
Starting in 2016, U.S. diplomats and intelligence officers, first in Havana, later elsewhere, reported a cluster of symptoms: pressure, pain, dizziness, cognitive fog. It became known as Havana syndrome, or anomalous health incidents. A 2020 U.S. National Academy's report concluded that directed, pulsed radiofrequency energy was the most plausible mechanism for a subset of cases. That finding is frequently cited as proof of an energy weapon.
But it didn't end there.
In 2023, a U.S. intelligence community assessment concluded it was very unlikely that a foreign adversary using a weapon was responsible, attributing many incidents to pre-existing conditions, environmental factors, and other causes. Large imaging studies published in 2024 found no significant differences between the brains of affected personnel and matched controls, contradicting an earlier, smaller study. The matter remains politically live.
So what's the responsible position?
Not it was a weapon, not it was nothing, but the dramatic mechanism isn't proven. Official assessments have leaned against it, and the question is still open. Policy should be robust whether or not such weapons exist, not built on the assumption that they certainly do.
Where do you mark the front line?
The hardest conceptual problem in regulating neuroweapons is that the front line is invisible and may run through a civilian's living room. Conventional weapons announce themselves, a cognitive weapon, by design, would not.
Compare the two postures.
In open or hot conflict, you'd see acoustic or RF devices intended to impair enemy combatants' cognition, soldier augmentation for faster targeting, drone control by brain-computer interface. Attribution is hard, but the act of conflict is visible, and it falls partly under the laws of war. In peacetime or cold competition, you see mass attention and emotion shaping via platforms happening now and covert, deniable, individually targeted operations, if they exist at all. No declared war, no clear legal regime applies, and victims may never know. The cold column is the more dangerous one for civil liberties, precisely because it operates below the threshold of declared conflict.
3 hard questions. Would non-consensual use ever be ethical?
Almost never, but the honest answer is not never. The defensible exceptions are narrow and familiar from other law. A person who lacks decision-making capacity and faces imminent, grave harm may be treated without contemporaneous consent, the logic that licenses emergency surgery on an unconscious patient. A court might, under strict due process, compel a narrow neural measurement, much as it compels a blood draw. What is not defensible is covert influence, interrogation by forcible brain reading, or any manipulation that bypasses a competent person's conscious will.
Second question, a global ban with an enforced moratorium?
There's a strong case, modeled on the biological and chemical weapons conventions. In favor, such weapons would be uniquely deniable, would target the seat of human dignity itself, and like biological weapons offer little stable advantage once both sides possess them. Against, a ban is only as good as its verification, and you cannot inspect for a weapon you cannot detect. The realistic path is a ban coupled with a serious, funded program to build the detection science verification would require.
And third, detecting illegal use?
2 very different problems. Detecting illegal data practices, a company reading neural data without consent, an employer monitoring brains, is tractable today through ordinary tools, mandatory disclosure, audits, tamper-evident logging, and penalties severe enough to bite. Detecting an alleged covert neuroweapon is far harder and, candidly, beyond current capability for the more exotic claims. The constructive response is to invest in the science that could make it tractable.
Section 9, the evidentiary problem. Could you ever prove, after the fact, that a mind was controlled?
With today's science, no, not for the strong claim of covert, remote mind control. There is no validated forensic test that can examine a person and establish that their thoughts or actions were externally directed. The brain's normal variability is so large that distinguishing influenced from ordinary states is, at present, not possible to a forensic standard.
What can forensic neuroscience do?
It can sometimes document physical injury consistent with energy exposure. It can establish whether an implanted device was present and what it logged if the device kept honest logs. It can document a pattern of coercion or surveillance through ordinary evidence, records, witnesses, communications. What it cannot do is read the residue of an alleged covert influence off a brain scan.
And this is an argument for regulation, not against.
Exactly. The provability gap is not a reason to dismiss the concern, it's a reason to build the infrastructure that would close it. If neurotech devices were legally required to maintain tamper-evident, independently auditable logs, the neural equivalent of an aircraft's black box, then abuse by a known device would become provable after the fact. That's an achievable legislative goal today, and the single most useful thing a lawmaker could do for anyone who fears their mind has been tampered with.
Section 10, the benevolent case. We've talked about threats. What good can neurotechnology do?
It would be a grave mistake to treat neurotechnology only as a threat. In clinical hands, it's one of the most hopeful developments in modern medicine. The restoration cases are already real. People with paralysis controlling cursors, robotic arms, and tablets through implanted interfaces. deep brain stimulation calming the tremor of Parkinson's and, increasingly, treatment-resistant depression and epilepsy. Cochlear implants and emerging visual prostheses. And laboratory systems that have decoded attempted or imagined speech to give a voice back to people who have lost theirs.
Specific milestones?
By mid-2025, 5 people with severe paralysis were reported using one company's implant. Another company's device has been guided into the brain through a blood vessel rather than open surgery. Real, not speculative.
And the horizon of good, what's plausibly coming?
Objective, continuous monitoring that could transform psychiatry from a discipline of self-report into one of measurement. Early detection of stroke, seizure, and neurodegeneration. Closed-loop therapies that deliver stimulation only when symptoms appear. Communication for the locked-in. Safer attention monitoring for pilots and long-haul drivers. And, further out, genuine augmentation of memory and learning.
So the task isn't to stop the technology.
Right. The benefits are real enough that a blanket prohibition would be both impossible and cruel. The task is not to stop neurotechnology but to ensure its benefits arrive without its harms, which is exactly what rights frameworks are for.
Section 11. How AI changes everything.
It's impossible to reason about neurorights without reasoning about AI, because AI is the component that turns a stream of brain signals into knowledge about a person. The device captures the signal, but the model finds the meaning. This changes the risk calculus in 4 specific ways.
Walk us through them.
1. Decoding leaps ahead of consent. A device you authorize to track your sleep may, with a better model applied to the same raw data later, suddenly reveal far more than you agreed to share. 2. Foundation models for the brain. Like language models, brain foundation models trained on large neural datasets promise to decode new individuals with little calibration, which means your brain data, pooled with millions of others, makes everyone easier to read.
And 3 and 4?
3. Closed loops invite manipulation. When an AI both reads your state and decides what stimulation or content to feed back, the line between therapy and manipulation becomes a matter of who sets the objective function. 4. Inference over collection. The danger migrates from what is measured to what is inferred, precisely the category most laws fail to protect. The policy implication is blunt. Neurorights law that does not govern the AI applied to neural data is protecting a locked door beside an open window.
Section 12. The trade. What rights will we hand over, and have we already?
If the last 20 years of digital life teach anything, it's that people trade intimate data for convenience readily, repeatedly, and without much regret until the consequences arrive. We surrendered location, contacts, browsing and biometrics for free services and faster phones. There's no reason to expect neural data will be different unless the rules are different.
So what gets quietly surrendered?
Mental privacy, traded for personalization. And a slice of agency, traded for the convenience of a system that anticipates your wants. The decisive question is whether the most sensitive category of data humanity has ever generated will be governed by the same click-to-accept consent regime that has so comprehensively failed everywhere else, or whether some neural rights will be made inalienable, so they cannot be signed away no matter how tempting the app.
Section 13. How everyday life changes.
Second-order effects, reaching well beyond privacy. In the workplace, neural monitoring of attention and fatigue could improve safety and just as easily become the most invasive surveillance ever deployed against employees. In education, attention tracking promises personalized learning and threatens to discipline children's inner states.
And in the courts, the markets, the culture?
In the justice system, the temptation to use neural data as a lie detector or risk score will be enormous and, given the science, mostly unwarranted. In the economy, a neurodivide looms. If cognitive augmentation works and is expensive, it could entrench inequality at the level of the brain itself, which is why fair access to augmentation is one of the 5 rights. And in culture, a society in which inner states are routinely measured may slowly lose the very idea of a private inner life.
Section 14. Victims. How do we define victim of neurotechnology?
Carefully, both to help real victims and to avoid a category so loose it helps no one. The defensible definition centers on demonstrable harm arising from the use or misuse of a neurotechnology, in 4 recognizable classes.
Which are:
Data rights victims, people whose neural data was collected, inferred from, shared or sold without valid consent. The largest and most provable class. Clinical and research harm patients or trial participants injured by a device, an explantation, a malfunction, or inadequate consent. Coercion and surveillance victims, people pressured into neural monitoring, or monitored covertly. And discrimination victims, disadvantaged in hiring, insurance, credit or justice on the basis of neural data or inferences.
There's a careful note here about people who report believing they've been targeted.
A growing number of people report believing they are victims of covert, remote neural influence. Their distress is real and deserves a serious, humane response, not reflexive dismissal.
At the same time,
an honest framework has to acknowledge what we established earlier. There's currently no validated way to confirm covert remote influence, and for the specific symptoms most often described, mainstream medical assessment finds a range of explanations, many treatable. The compassionate and truthful response is the one good medicine already offers: take the suffering seriously, pursue thorough clinical evaluation, document everything, and press for the detection science and device accountability rules that would let any future claim be tested rather than merely believed or denied. Helping victims means building systems that can tell the difference, not assuming the answer in either direction.
Section 15, The Horizon. 3, 5, 10, and 20 years out.
Forecasts in this field age badly, so treat the following as scenario planning, with confidence falling sharply as the horizon lengthens. 3 years, consolidation. More U.S. states and the first national laws act on UNESCO. Consumer brain wearables go mainstream. The first BCI nears market approval.
5 years?
Normalization. Neural data routine in some workplaces and clinics. Litigation defines early case law. Regional rules in the EU take shape.
10 years?
Integration. Reliable consumer read-write interfaces. The neuro divide becomes a live equality issue. Pressure for a binding treaty.
And 20?
Speculative, high-bandwidth interfaces could reshape work, communication and identity, if the hard technical problems are solved at all. The honest 20-year statement is a conditional, not a prediction.
Section 16, Follow the money. Who benefits commercially?
The value does not sit only with the device makers everyone names. 6 layers. Device makers: Neuralink, Synchron, BlackRock Neurotech, Precision Neuroscience, Paradromics, Kernel, Emotive, Muse. They monetize hardware, and increasingly the data and software around it. Platforms and big tech: whoever owns the operating layer that brain interfaces plug into captures enormous value.
And the less visible players?
Data brokers and advertisers, the most lucrative and least visible beneficiaries, for whom neural inference is the richest targeting signal ever produced. Employers and insurers, who benefit from knowing the attention, stress and health states of workers and policyholders. Pharma and clinical providers, through closed-loop therapeutics and objective biomarkers. And defense and intelligence, the least transparent sector. The pattern to watch is the social media era pattern. The company that sells you the helpful device is rarely the one that profits most from the data it generates.
Section 17, The Classified Question. What might exist behind secrecy?
Any honest treatment must address what is secret, while refusing to pretend that secrecy is the same as evidence. 2 categories. What is documented? The historical record contains real, declassified programs that explored manipulating the mind. The United States MKUltra mind control and interrogation research from the 1950s to 70s, largely conducted without consent and later condemned. And Cold War research on microwave and behavioral effects on both sides. These are not conspiracy theories, they are matters of public record.
And what's plausibly classified today?
It's reasonable to assume several states fund classified neuroscience with defensive and offensive aims, because the public defense research record implies a classified counterpart, as it does in every dual-use field. The logic is ordinary: protect a capability advantage, protect sources and methods, avoid the diplomatic cost of confirming research into prohibited seeming areas. None of that requires or supports the strong claim that deployed devices are covertly controlling civilian populations.
Where does speculation end?
Speculating that classified research exists is well-grounded. Asserting that a fielded, covert, civilian targeting mind control weapon exists is not. It remains unproven, and the most exotic public claims, where formally examined, have been judged unlikely. Good policy does not require knowing the secret, it requires assuming states keep some, and binding them anyway.
Section 18, Action by Institution. What can each branch do now?
Legislators define neural data to include inferences, classify it as a special protected category, make a core of neural rights inalienable, fund a regulator, constitutionalize the foundational right where possible. The executive branch adopt the UNESCO recommendation domestically, convene a national neurotechnology strategy across health, labor, justice, and defense, require neural device black box logging and procurement.
Judiciary, law enforcement, medical sector?
Judiciary, prepare doctrine now, recognize neural data within existing privacy, bodily integrity, and dignity jurisprudence, set evidentiary standards that exclude neural lie detection until validated. Law enforcement, treat covert neural data collection as a serious offense, build the technical capacity to investigate device-based abuse, resist adopting neural surveillance tools without statutory authority. Medical sector, tighten informed consent standards, insist that neural data donated for research not be commercialized, lead, rather than follow, on regulation.
Section 19, Oversight. What should it actually look like?
Oversight that exists only on paper is worse than none, because it manufactures false confidence. 5 components. First, a competent regulator with technical staff, the power to license high-risk neural products before market, and the power to fine and ban, not a committee that issues guidance. Second, mandatory pre-deployment assessment and ethical and rights impact assessment for any system that reads or writes to the nervous system.
And the other 3?
Third, auditable transparency, the black box logging requirement, so that what a device does to a brain is recorded and independently inspectable. Fourth, independent red teaming, funded adversarial testing of devices and the AI models behind them. Fifth, an international node, a body to handle cross-border and weapons questions, with eventual verification powers. The seat of the binding treaty that soft law should grow into. The guiding principle is proportionality. A meditation headband and a cortical implant should not face identical rules, but both should face some rule.
In closing, the window, and who holds it open.
The history of technology regulation is a history of arriving late. We wrote the rules for the automobile after the deaths, for finance after the crashes, for social media after the damage was done. Neurotechnology offers something rare, a chance to legislate before the harm becomes structural, while the industry is small enough to shape and the public is still alarmed enough to act.
And what's missing?
Not the idea, but the will. The decision, by enough legislators in enough places, to treat the inside of a human head as the one place that markets and states may not enter without permission. The mind has been private for as long as there have been minds. Whether it stays that way is now, for the first time, a policy choice. It will be made in the next handful of years, by people who can either read this subject seriously or wait until it is too late to matter.
A note on method.
Where the evidence is solid, the laws, the rulings, the technology that exists, this essay states it plainly and cites it. Where the evidence is contested or absent, the exotic weapons, the classified capabilities, the strongest claims of covert control, it says so, and resists the temptation to resolve uncertainty in either direction for effect. On a subject that touches the deepest fears and hopes we have about our own minds, that discipline is not a hedge. It is the whole point.
And a word about TI1 Voice.
This essay is published as part of the TI1 Voice Initiative at one.whiteysk.org, founded by Stefan van der Aa to give a unified voice to the community of so-called targeted individuals, people who report being subjected to organized harassment, surveillance, and what they describe as remote forms of physical and psychological abuse. The platform brings together their testimonies and supporting documentation in a single, structured place, so that experiences too often dismissed or scattered can be recorded, preserved, and examined seriously. Its goal is to document these accounts rigorously, to support the individuals affected, and to advocate before Belgian, European, and international institutions for recognition, protection, and proper investigation.
Sources and further reading. The references that ground every claim in this essay.
These slides list the 30-plus sources behind the arguments, UNESCO's recommendation pages, the Nature commentary that launched the field, Chile's constitutional amendment and Supreme Court ruling, the Future of Privacy Forum and Stanford Law analyses, the Neurorights Foundation's report on 30 consumer companies, the NATO and U.S. National Academy studies on cognitive warfare and Havana syndrome, and the industry coverage from KFF Health News, CBS, Cooley, Davis Wright Tremaine, Clinical Trials Arena, and others. Every contested point in this talk has a citation, every uncertain point is labeled as such.
And the continuation of the source list, for any listener who wants to go deeper.
The full bibliography is in the essay version of this document available alongside this presentation. Thank you for listening. The choice the essay describes is yours, ours, and your legislators'. Make it deliberately, and soon.